The West Memphis, 3 child murders. On May 6, 1993, 3 boys were found in a drainage ditch in Robin Hood Hills, West Memphis, Arkansas. Steve Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, all second graders and Cub Scouts who regularly played together, had been reported missing the evening before. Their bodies were discovered partially submerged in muddy creek water, bound with their own shoelaces in an unusual pattern, left wrist to left ankle, right wrist to right ankle. The boys had last been seen playing in the wooded area behind Blue Beacon Truck Wash on May 5th. They were experienced at playing in those woods. It was their neighborhood, their territory. When they didn't return home by 7 p.m., their families immediately knew something was wrong and contacted police. The next afternoon at 1:30 p.m., searchers made the horrifying discovery in the drainage ditch. What happened during those missing hours? And who was responsible? 3 teenagers were arrested on June 3, 1993, less than a month after the boys vanished. Damian Eccles, 18 years old, was a self-proclaimed Wiccan with a documented mental health history. Jason Baldwin, 16, was Eccles' best friend, a good student, but considered a social outcast by his peers. Jesse Miss Kelly Jr., 17 years old, had an IQ of approximately 72 and barely knew the other 2 defendants. The case against them rested almost entirely on Miss Kelly's statement to police. He'd been questioned for approximately 12 hours, with only 30 to 45 minutes recorded on tape. His account contained critical factual errors that should have raised immediate red flags. He claimed the boys were bound with rope when they were actually tied with shoelaces. Stated the events occurred during school hours when the boys were actually in class. And described things that forensic evidence simply didn't support. Could 3 teenagers really commit such a terrible act based on nothing more than a flawed confession? The prosecution presented a theory that shocked the Bible Belt community. The deaths were a ritual occurrence. Expert testimony about heavy metal music and black clothing was presented as evidence of supernatural activity. Defense attorneys argued this was prejudice, not proof. This was 1993, at the absolute height of nationwide panic about such practices. Parents across America feared secret covens were targeting their families. In February 1994, Miss Kelly was found guilty and sentenced to life plus 40 years. 1 month later in March, Eccles received the ultimate punishment, while Baldwin got life without parole. The jury deliberated for hours before handing down these devastating sentences. But questions about the investigation persisted among legal observers and true believers in justice. In 1996, HBO's Paradise Lost documentary brought national attention to the case. Viewers across the country noticed something deeply troubling. There was almost no physical evidence connecting the 3 defendants to the scene. No blood matching the accused, no DNA linking them to the location, no forensic connection whatsoever between the teenagers and the terrible events in those woods. A disoriented man covered in mud and blood had entered a Bojangles restaurant the night the boys went missing, just hours after they vanished. He left blood smeared on the restroom walls, blood that wasn't his own. Police collected samples but never pursued the lead with any vigor. That evidence, potentially the key to everything, was later lost entirely in the chaos of the investigation. Years passed slowly. The 3 men remained behind bars. Eccles on death row awaiting his final day, the others serving life sentences in maximum security. Then in 2007, advanced DNA testing excluded all 3 men. Not a single trace of their genetic material appeared anywhere at the scene. Nothing. Not one fiber, not one hair, not one drop of blood. But there was DNA at the scene. A hair not inconsistent with Terry Hobbs, Stevie Branch's stepfather, was found tied into the very knots binding Michael Moore's body. How did that hair get there? In 2012, 3 witnesses stated under oath that Hobbs's nephew told them his uncle was responsible for what happened to the boys. The key witness, who claimed to attend a gathering with Eccles, recanted completely in 2004. Vicky Hutchison admitted police told her exactly what to say during her testimony. She'd lied under oath at their direction, she claimed. After 18 agonizing years in prison, the state offered an unusual arrangement in August 2011. An offered plea allowed the 3 men to maintain their innocence while technically pleading guilty to secure their freedom. They accepted immediately. Eccles was weeks away from a scheduled execution. They were released, but remain legally convicted to this day. The twist that haunts this case. On August 1st, 2025, Judge Tanya Alexander approved testing of 15 categories of evidence, including shoelaces, hair samples, and other crime scene materials, using advanced MVAC technology. This new technology can extract DNA from surfaces that older methods missed. After more than 3 decades, the truth may finally emerge from those woods in West Memphis. Evidence has been sent to Bode Laboratories for comprehensive analysis. Results are expected in the coming months. Damien Eccles lives in New York with his wife Lori Davis, works as an author and artist, and continues fighting for full exoneration. The Innocence Project actively supports the case and believes the truth will vindicate these men completely. The next case involves 2 best friends and what should have been an ordinary night of teenage adventure. Kevin Ives and Don Henry. Kevin Ives, 17, and Don Henry, 16, were Bryant High School students who shared a passion for hunting and working on their cars. They'd been best friends for years, the kind of bond that forms in small Arkansas towns. On August 23, 1987, their bodies were found on railroad tracks near Alexander, Arkansas, run over by a 75-car Union Pacific train traveling through the darkness. The train crew reported seeing the boys' bodies motionless and partially covered by a green tarp, a detail suggesting they were placed there intentionally, not lying there by accident. The massive locomotive simply couldn't stop in time. The crew watched helplessly as tons of steel rolled over 2 teenagers. The night before their bodies were discovered, Kevin and Don had gone spotlighting, a form of night hunting popular with rural teenagers near the tracks around midnight. They were experienced outdoorsmen who knew the area inside and out, had walked those tracks countless times. What happened next would spark one of Arkansas's most disturbing mysteries and launch a mother's decades-long quest for truth. State medical examiner Fahmy Malak ruled the deaths accidental almost immediately, claiming the boys had smoked 20 marijuana cigarettes and passed out on the tracks due to what he called THC intoxication. The families knew instantly something was catastrophically wrong with this explanation. Kevin and Don were responsible young men who took school and their futures seriously, and the medical explanation made absolutely no sense to anyone who knew them. The families refused to accept the verdict. They demanded answers, hired their own experts, and pushed for a second examination. In February 1988, Malak's ruling was overturned and the cause officially changed to undetermined. But that still wasn't the truth. In April 1988, a second autopsy performed by Dr. Joseph Burton revealed Don had been stabbed in the back, and Kevin's skull was crushed, likely by the butt of his own rifle. The cause was finally changed to probable homicide. Dr. Burton's examination determined the boys had smoked only 1 or 2 cigarettes that night, nowhere near the 20 Malak claimed in his initial report. They were already deceased when placed on the tracks. The train wasn't the cause. It was the cover-up. The case featured on Unsolved Mysteries in October 1988, bringing national attention and thousands of tips. The show's coverage changed everything. Then witnesses who came forward with information began experiencing their own tragedies at an alarming, suspicious rate. Keith Coney told his family 2 officers were responsible for what happened to Kevin and Don. Shortly after, his throat was slashed and he crashed his motorcycle while fleeing someone who was attacking him. Keith McCaskill knew something too. He made his own arrangements for a service, told his family goodbye as if he knew what was coming, and was found with 113 stab wounds. Gregory Collins was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury and was ended by a blast to the face before he could speak. A man known as Booney Bearden was also subpoenaed. He simply disappeared without a trace, never seen again. Jeff Rhodes told his family he knew too much about what the boys saw that night. He was found with damage to his head, his hands and feet partially removed, and his body set on fire in an apparent attempt to destroy identifying evidence. What information were these people going to share? What did they know that made them targets? Evidence suggests the boys stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see. A drop from low-flying aircraft connected to operations at Mina Intermountain Municipal Airport. This was the same location where CIA-connected operator Barry Seal had conducted smuggling for the notorious Medellin organization before his own execution in 1986. The green tarp the train crew reported seeing? It was never found by police investigating the scene, as if it never existed. Dan Harmon became the special prosecutor assigned to investigate the boys' deaths. He was supposed to find justice for Kevin's and Don's families, to bring closure after the botched initial investigation. Instead, years later, he was convicted of federal charges including racketeering, extortion, and involvement with controlled substances. But he was never charged with having any role in the boys' deaths despite the family's suspicions. The devastating twist? Fahmy Malak resigned under intense pressure in September 1991 after his competence was questioned in multiple cases. Dan Harmon passed away in September 2023, taking whatever he knew to his grave. Linda Ives, Kevin's mother who fought tirelessly for justice and became a crusader for other families seeking truth, passed away in June 2021 at 71 years old. She never saw justice for her son, despite dedicating the last 34 years of her life to finding it. The case remains officially unsolved to this day. All key figures who might have provided answers are now deceased or elderly. No law enforcement agency actively pursues new leads. The boys on the tracks, as they became known, remain an Arkansas mystery. 2 teenagers who saw something they shouldn't have and paid the ultimate price. But some cases remain open even decades later, with investigators refusing to give up hope. Melissa Witt. Melissa Ann Witt, 19 years old, was an honors student at West Ark Community College and worked part-time as an assistant at a dental office in Fort Smith, Arkansas. On December 1st, 1994, she went to surprise her mother at Bowling World and was taken from the parking lot. It was supposed to be a simple surprise visit to say hello to her mom. Instead, it became one of Arkansas's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Her mother was bowling in a league that evening, something she did regularly. Melissa decided to surprise her with a visit. She arrived at the bowling alley around 6:30 to 7 p.m. She parked her car in the lot. She never made it inside the building. 2 days later, on December 3rd, her car was found abandoned in the parking lot. Blood was discovered both in the parking lot and inside the vehicle. Evidence showed a violent struggle had taken place right there in a public parking lot. A blood trail led from Melissa's car to where another vehicle had been parked. Her keys, with blood traces on them, and a crushed hair clip were found at the scene. Whoever took Melissa didn't do so quietly. On January 13, 1995, trappers discovered her body in Ozark National Forest, approximately 50 miles from the bowling alley. She had been taken to a remote area near Turner Bend, a location that suggested the perpetrator knew the area well. All of her clothing, shoes, and jewelry had been removed. The cause was strangulation. Her body had been there for over a month in the elements. For years, for more than 2 decades, investigators worked the case, but had no solid leads to pursue. The trail had gone cold almost immediately. Then, in 2019, evidence emerged that seemed to crack the case wide open. DNA evidence linked Charles Ray Vines to the scene. Finally, after 25 years, there was hope. Who was Charles Ray Vines? He was a convicted individual responsible for taking the lives of 2 elderly women in 1993 and 1995. His pattern of targeting women was well documented. His DNA was found on a cigarette filter and mattress cover near where Melissa's body was discovered in the forest. He had been seen wearing a bowling league shirt, which placed him in the right location at the right time. His work routes as a truck driver placed him near both the bowling alley where Melissa disappeared and the remote location where her body was found. Investigators were preparing to question Vines about Melissa's case. The FBI was ready with their questions, their evidence, their theories. They had their suspect after a quarter-century of searching. Justice for Melissa and her family seemed within reach for the first time since that December night in 1994. Then came the devastating twist that would leave this case forever incomplete. In September 2019, Vines passed away in prison. He was gone before FBI investigators could interview him, before they could ask him a single question about that night. He took whatever he knew about Melissa Witt to his grave. The opportunity to finally solve this case died with him in that prison cell. The case remains officially unsolved to this day. In August 2024, Hulu released the documentary At Wit's End, produced by acclaimed director Ridley Scott, bringing renewed national attention to Melissa's story. Private investigator LaDonna Humphrey maintains that an unnamed man from Melissa's diary is the actual person responsible, not Vines, and continues investigating independently. A $29,000 reward remains active for information leading to a resolution. The tip line is 1-800-440-1922. The website whokilledmissywit.com continues gathering information and keeping Melissa's memory alive 3 decades after that December night when she went to surprise her mother at the bowling alley. The question still haunts Fort Smith. If Vines was responsible, did he act alone? Was there someone else involved? And if he wasn't the one, who was? And are they still out there? The next case shows how someone can hide in plain sight for 16 years and then expose themselves in the most bizarre way possible. Rebecca Christian Gould. Rebecca Gould, 22 years old, was a Northwest Arkansas community college student who aspired to be a journalist. She had dreams of writing important stories, of making a difference through her work. On September 20th, 2004, she was staying at her ex-boyfriend's mobile home in Guion, Arkansas, after dropping him off at work that morning. Her ex-boyfriend was Casey McCullough. They had broken up but remained friendly enough that she sometimes stayed at his place when she was in town. That morning, she drove him to his job at a local business and returned to the mobile home alone. She planned to spend the day there before heading back to college. She was never seen alive again. 7 days later, on September 27th, her body was found in an embankment off Highway 9, wrapped in a blanket. The location was remote and difficult to access, down a steep incline off the rural highway. Someone had gone to significant effort to hide what they'd done. When police investigated McCullough's mobile home where Rebecca had been staying, they found a scene that had been altered. The mattress had large amounts of blood on it. Someone had flipped it over to hide the stains from immediate view. Bloody pillows were stuffed under the bed, out of sight. Bloody sheets sat in the washing machine, partially cleaned. Evidence showed someone had tried cleaning the scene with bleach, attempting to destroy forensic evidence. The weapon used, described as a piano leg that had been removed from an instrument, was never recovered. McCullough claimed when he returned home from work that day, he didn't notice anything unusual about his home. He was questioned extensively by investigators, put through multiple interviews, but never charged with any involvement. The investigation stalled with no solid suspect and no clear motive. Then in 2016, someone sent an anonymous letter to Rebecca's father. The letter contained information that reignited the investigation, providing new leads to pursue. In 2018, the podcast Hell and Gone brought national attention to Rebecca's case, with host Catherine Townsend diving deep into the evidence and inconsistencies. William Alma Miller was Casey McCullough's cousin. He had been interviewed by police shortly after Rebecca's passing in 2004 and dismissed as a suspect with no apparent involvement. For 16 years, he lived his life freely. He moved to the Philippines, got married, started a family, and had 2 children. He built a whole new life on the other side of the world. Then came the twist that defied all logic and belief. In January 2020, Miller joined a Facebook group called Unsolved Passing of Rebecca Gould, created by investigators and true advocates hoping to generate new leads. For 10 months, he actively participated in discussions about the case. He sent direct messages to investigators asking questions and offering observations. He shared theories about what might have happened to Rebecca. He expressed sympathy for her family and their loss. He was the one who ended her life, and he was discussing his own actions with the very people trying to solve the case. His comments eventually raised red flags with investigators. When he suggested the responsible party wore gloves during the incident, information that hadn't been publicly released, investigators took serious notice. They brought him in for questioning. After failing a polygraph examination, Miller confessed to what happened that September day. He told police he returned to Casey's house while Casey was at work. He knocked on the door, claiming he needed to use the phone, a reasonable request from family. Rebecca let him in without hesitation. He was Casey's cousin, someone she had met before, someone who should have been safe. Once inside, Miller stated an overwhelming urge came over him, and he ended her life with the piano leg. On November 7th, 2020, Miller was arrested in Oregon, where he'd been living. On October 18th, 2022, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 40 years in the Arkansas Department of Correction. He must serve at least 70% of that sentence, 28 to 30 years, before becoming eligible for parole. Judge Tim Weaver promised to write an extensive letter opposing any parole when that time comes. Miller is currently incarcerated at East Arkansas Regional Unit. The man who thought he could participate in solving his own case, who believed he was clever enough to hide in plain sight while discussing the very thing he'd done, is now exactly where he belongs. His arrogance led directly to his capture. While investigators eventually found Rebecca, the next case involves a disappearance where answers were literally right in front of everyone the entire time. Ebby Jane Stepach. Ebby Jane Stepach, 18 years old, was a Little Rock Central High School senior who worked 2 part-time jobs to fund her dream of becoming a cosmetologist. She was ambitious, hardworking, and focused on her future. On October 24th, 2015. She told her stepfather she had been assaulted at a party 2 days earlier and wanted to press charges against those responsible. She was never seen alive again. On October 23rd, Ebby attended a party where she claimed the incident occurred. She knew people there, thought she would be safe. The next day, October 24th, she spoke with her stepfather about what happened at the party. She was determined to report it to authorities. She sent messages to the young men she accused, threatening to go to police if they didn't delete a video they'd allegedly recorded. On October 25th, she had a brief, disoriented phone call with her brother around 2 p.m. That was the last contact anyone had with Ebby. Her phone went dead shortly after. 2 days later, on October 27th, her car was found abandoned at Shalamont Park in West Little Rock. The vehicle had an empty gas tank and a dead battery. The key was still in the ignition. Inside was her makeup, which she always took meticulous care of, treating each item like treasure, now broken and scattered throughout the vehicle. Her phone, purse, keys, and medication were all inside the car. Everything except Ebby. The men accused in the incident were questioned by police, but their cell phones were never searched for the alleged video evidence Ebby had mentioned in her messages to them. This became a major point of frustration for her family. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. The family searched desperately, following every possible lead. Private investigators were hired with money the family didn't have. The community rallied around the Stepak family, organizing search parties and keeping Ebby's face in the news. But there was no sign of Ebby anywhere, despite all these efforts. Then, nearly 3 years later, came the discovery that would shock the city and raise serious questions about the initial investigation. On May 24th, 2018, skeletal remains were found in a drainage pipe at Shalamont Park, just yards from where her car had been discovered nearly 3 years earlier. The remains were in a large drainage pipe that connected to the park's water management system. How was this possible? How could a body remain undiscovered for nearly 3 years in a park that had been searched repeatedly? A family friend reported smelling decomposition just days after Ebby disappeared and called police to report it. She was told officers had already searched the entire area with specially trained cadaver dogs and found nothing. But Detective Tommy Hudson later confirmed the drain was never actually searched during the initial investigation, a devastating oversight. For nearly 3 years, Ebby's remains were in that pipe while searchers combed the area repeatedly, while her family held candlelight vigils at that exact park, while private investigators interviewed potential witnesses, while the community put up hundreds of missing person flyers throughout Little Rock. She was right there the entire time, just feet away from where they were searching. Her brother Trevor, who was the last person to speak with Ebby during that disoriented phone call, spent years searching for his sister. The guilt and burden weighed heavily on him. He passed away at 35 from a massive heart attack. Their mother believes the emotional burden of losing his sister and never finding answers contributed to his premature passing. The case remains unsolved but actively investigated. In October 2025, on the 10th anniversary of Ebby's disappearance, investigators released a new lead, confirming Ebby was near 53rd Street and University Avenue on the evening of October 24, 2015. Information they hoped would generate new tips. The Arkansas Attorney General's Cold Case Unit partnered with Little Rock PD in 2024 to bring fresh eyes to the investigation. Someone knows what happened to Ebby that October evening. Someone knows how she ended up in that drainage pipe. Someone knows the truth about the party, the alleged assault, and what came after when she threatened to go to police. The question that haunts her family 10 years later is simple but painful. Will anyone ever come forward with the truth? Sometimes the right person is charged but can't be convicted. Sometimes the wrong person stands trial. And sometimes the actual perpetrator goes free to strike again. Nona Dirksmeyer. Nona Dirksmeyer, 19 years old, was a sophomore music education major at Arkansas Tech University, a talented soprano with a beautiful voice, and Miss Pettit Jean Valley, 2005, who competed in Miss Arkansas. She had her whole future ahead of her. On December 15, 2005, she was found in her off-campus apartment in Russellville, the victim of a brutal attack. The scene investigators encountered was horrific. Nona had been struck in the back of the head with a floor lamp, then stabbed repeatedly. A wrapper from a prophylactic was found at the scene. It would later prove crucial to the investigation, though not in the way anyone expected. Her boyfriend, Kevin Jones, and his mother discovered her body that afternoon when they went to check on her. Jones immediately became the focus of the investigation. Statistics show partners are often responsible in cases like this. In March 2006, he was arrested and charged with her passing. During the trial in July 2007, the defense argued forcefully that the physical evidence didn't match the prosecution's theory at all. There were unexplained forensic questions. The timeline didn't work. Evidence suggested someone else had been in that apartment. The jury found Jones not guilty after deliberating on the evidence presented. If Jones didn't do it, who did? That became the pressing question investigators faced. In December 2007, DNA from the wrapper was linked to Gary Dunn, a neighbor who lived directly across the parking lot from Nona's apartment. He could see her comings and goings from his window. Dunn had been interviewed early in the investigation and reportedly passed a polygraph examination. Case closed, investigators thought. He passed the test. But audio recordings later revealed the polygrapher told police Dunn showed deceptive results on multiple questions, then agreed to report he passed anyway. The test was essentially meaningless. Dunn was charged with capital offense in 2008 based on the DNA evidence. But there was a significant problem. Law enforcement had made numerous mistakes during the investigation that compromised the evidence. His first trial in April 2010 ended with a hung jury unable to reach a verdict. His second trial in May 2010 also ended with a hung jury. In April 2011, charges against Dunn were dismissed entirely. Prosecutors didn't have enough clean evidence to try him a third time. It wasn't that the juries thought Dunn was innocent. It was that law enforcement's errors made conviction impossible under reasonable doubt standards. But Dunn's criminal history revealed a deeply disturbing pattern that everyone should have seen. In 2002, he attacked a female jogger with a tree branch in Russellville and threatened to end her life while she begged for mercy. His estranged wife testified during proceedings that she saw him exiting Nona's apartment at 2 a.m. the night of the incident. But this testimony was deemed unreliable by prosecutors. Then came the twist that proved some people never stop hunting. In December 2018, Dunn was arrested for attempting to kidnap 3 women in one night in Russellville, the same town where Nona had lived. One of his intended targets was Riley Wagner, who would later become Miss Arkansas USA 2022. Police found ropes and knives in his vehicle when they arrested him, tools prepared for his planned actions. Wagner told reporters her mother had specifically warned her about Dunn's case growing up because she competed in pageants, just like Nona had. Dunn is currently serving 15 years for the 2018 kidnapping attempts. He must serve at least 70% before parole eligibility. But he has never been convicted of what happened to Nona Dirksmeyer. The case remains officially unsolved nearly 20 years later. Kevin Jones was tried for something he didn't do, subjected to public scrutiny and suspicion for years. Gary Dunn was charged but never convicted due to investigative errors that tainted the evidence. And 13 years after Nona's passing, Dunn tried to take 3 more women, including another pageant contestant. The system failed twice. It failed Nona when investigative errors prevented her suspected attacker from being convicted. And it nearly failed Riley Wagner and 2 other women who escaped only through luck, awareness, and quick thinking. But the next case involves someone who thought they had gotten away with it, until technology caught up with them. Linda Collins. Linda Collins, 57 years old, was a former Arkansas state senator who served in both the House and Senate, respected by colleagues on both sides of the aisle. On June 4, 2019, her body was found wrapped in a comforter under a tarp in her driveway, having been there approximately 1 week in hot Arkansas summer conditions. The smell had become overpowering, alerting neighbors that something was terribly wrong. Linda had been out of the public eye for a short time, which wasn't unusual for her. On May 28th, she met her friend Rebecca O'Donnell for lunch at a local restaurant, catching up and discussing various topics. That was the day everything changed for Linda, though she had no idea what was coming. When Linda's father and adult son arrived at her home on June 4th to check on her after she'd been unreachable, they made the horrifying discovery on her property. The body was in advanced decomposition from a week in summer, heat making immediate identification difficult and the scene nightmarish. The scene suggested someone had tried to hide what they'd done, though not very effectively. Who would want to harm a former state senator? What motive could anyone possibly have? Rebecca O'Donnell and her boyfriend had removed surveillance cameras from Linda's home before her passing, thinking they'd covered their tracks. But what they didn't know was that investigators obtained cloud footage that had been automatically backed up before the cameras were removed. The videos showed O'Donnell with blood clearly visible on her hands, holding a large knife inside Linda's kitchen on the day Linda was last seen alive. O'Donnell wasn't just a casual friend. She was Linda's close personal companion, campaign aide during her political career, and trusted employee with access to nearly every aspect of Linda's life. She had keys to Linda's home, knew her schedule, and had Linda's complete trust. She was like family. As investigators dug deeper into O'Donnell's background and activities, they discovered O'Donnell had been taking from Linda for months before ending her life. She forged Linda's signature on numerous checks, siphoning money from her accounts. She sold $15,110 in stolen gold and silver coins that belonged to Linda. She was systematically stealing from the woman who trusted her most, who had welcomed her into her life. On June 17, 2019, came a moment that seemed pulled directly from a movie script. Sheriff Kevin Bell stated O'Donnell was arrested at gunpoint while driving to Linda's memorial service. She was on her way to publicly mourn the woman she had taken everything from, to cry crocodile tears in front of Linda's family and friends. But the story didn't end there. The twists kept coming. While awaiting trial in county jail, O'Donnell decided her problems required a permanent solution. She approached other inmates about staging her ex-husband's passing to make it look like he took his own life. She wrote a fake note in his voice explaining why he'd done it. The FBI later confirmed the handwriting was definitely hers through forensic analysis. She wanted inmates to destroy her vehicle to eliminate any remaining evidence law enforcement might find. She offered $30,000 in gold and silver as payment for these services. She wanted to eliminate prosecutors working her case. She wanted to eliminate a judge overseeing proceedings. She wanted to eliminate anyone who stood between her and freedom from these charges. In January 2020, additional charges were filed against O'Donnell. Solicitation of capital offense, plotting from jail to eliminate multiple people. On August 6, 2020, O'Donnell pleaded guilty to everything and was sentenced to 50 years in the Arkansas Department of Correction. There would be no trial, no chance to minimize her actions. She was transferred to an out-of-state facility for security reasons, keeping her away from the inmates she'd tried to recruit and from anyone else she might manipulate. Her parole eligibility date is approximately 2050, when she'll be 81 years old. The woman Linda Collins trusted with her campaign, her finances, her home, and her friendship took everything from her, then tried to take even more from behind bars. The case was featured on Dateline NBC's The Hands of a Killer in July 2024, bringing national attention to this shocking betrayal. Linda Collins dedicated her life to public service, to making Arkansas better. She never imagined the person closest to her would be the one to end it. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The next case sparked a national debate that had nothing to do with justice. Jesse Durkheising. Jesse Durkheising, 13 years old, was a 7th grader from Prairie Grove, Arkansas. His parents allowed him to spend weekends with family friends Davis Don Carpenter and Joshua Brown, believing he was helping at Carpenter's beauty salon to earn money for things he wanted. They trusted these men completely. On September 26, 1999, Jesse passed away at their Rogers, Arkansas apartment during a prolonged attack. Police responded to a frantic call from the apartment. When they arrived, they found Jesse in medical distress. He was rushed to the hospital, but couldn't be saved. The medical examiner determined he passed away from positional asphyxia, compounded by overdose of amitriptyline, a prescription medication. He'd been given so much of the substance that he couldn't reposition himself to breathe properly. When investigators searched the apartment, they found written notes in Carpenter's handwriting. The notes outlined in disturbing detail how to sedate someone and position them. The notes referenced threatening someone not to fight, or else for the next 14 hours, they would face terrible things. These weren't spontaneous actions. They were planned, documented, premeditated. Joshua Brown and Davis Don Carpenter were arrested immediately. The evidence against them was overwhelming and undeniable. Brown was 22 years old. Carpenter was 38. They'd known Jesse's family for years, had built that trust deliberately over time. The trials moved forward quickly. In March 2001, Joshua Brown was convicted and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The jury heard the horrific details of what happened in that apartment. 1 month later, in April 2001, Davis Carpenter pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received 2 life sentences. Both men would spend the rest of their lives in prison for what they did to a boy whose parents trusted them. But then came the twist. That had nothing to do with the case itself and everything to do with how America processed it. The case became nationally notorious, not for the facts of what happened, but for the media coverage debate it sparked. The Washington Times ran a front-page story with the headline, "Media Tune-Out Tragedy of Arkansas Boy," contrasting the minimal coverage Jesse's case received with the massive coverage given to Matthew Shepard's passing the year before. Shepard, a college student, had been targeted and ended in Wyoming in October 1998 because he was gay. LexisNexis recorded only 46 stories about Jesse Durkheising in the month after his passing. In contrast, there were 3,007 stories about Matthew Shepard in the month after his passing. The disparity was stark and undeniable when the numbers were laid out. Conservative commentators accused mainstream media of deliberate suppression because the perpetrators were gay men. They argued the media didn't want to report a case that didn't fit a particular narrative about hate directed at the LGBTQ community. Radio hosts, newspaper columnists, and television personalities used Jesse's case as proof of media bias for months after his passing. The debate raged for months. ABC News covered the controversy itself rather than the original case. Media criticism organizations wrote lengthy pieces about coverage decisions. Journalism schools used it as a case study in editorial judgment. Everyone had an opinion about why Jesse's case didn't receive the same attention as Matthew Shepard's. Lost in all the debate about media coverage was Jesse himself, a seventh grader who loved riding his bike, playing with friends, and earning money for the things kids want. He trusted the wrong people because his parents trusted them first. Joshua Brown remains incarcerated at East Arkansas Regional Unit, serving life without parole. Davis Don Carpenter passed away in prison, never eligible for release. Both received the sentences they deserved. While that case sparked debate, the next involved something far more sinister: a calculated plan to fund hate. The Mueller family. William Mueller, 52, was a licensed dealer who catered to militia enthusiasts in rural Pope County near Tilly, Arkansas. His wife Nancy, 28, and stepdaughter Sarah Powell were part of his blended family. The family reportedly had $50,000 in cash, gold coins, and over $30,000 worth of items at their home, a fact that would seal their fate. On January 11, 1996, white supremacists Chevy Kehoe and Daniel Lewis Lee arrived at the Mueller home with a plan. They wanted the family's money and valuables to fund their dream of establishing an all-white ethno-state somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. They'd selected the Muellers specifically because of what they knew the family had. Kehoe and Lee entered the home disguised as FBI agents, complete with fake badges and official-looking clothing. They waited inside for the family to return from errands. When William, Nancy, and Sarah arrived home, the two men ambushed them immediately. What happened next was methodical and cruel. Sarah was subjected to terrible treatment with an electric prod to force her to reveal where valuables were hidden throughout the house. She was just years old. William and Nancy were restrained while their home was ransacked. All three family members were struck with stun devices repeatedly. Then plastic bags were sealed over their heads with duct tape, cutting off their air supply completely. But Kehoe and Lee weren't finished. They drove the bodies to Illinois Bayou. They taped rocks to each body to weigh them down. They threw all three into the water, expecting them to stay submerged forever. For months, the Muellers were simply missing, their home abandoned, their whereabouts unknown. On June 28, 1996, the bodies were discovered in Lake Dardanelle when they surfaced despite the rocks. The horror of what had happened to this family became clear during the autopsies. Investigation intensified immediately. Chevy Kehoe and his brother Cheney had already made headlines. In February 1997, the Kehoe brothers' shootout with Ohio police was broadcast nationally on television. America watched as law enforcement engaged in a dramatic confrontation with these dangerous men. Cheney Kehoe passed away during the incident. Chevy was captured alive. In June 1997, Chevy Kehoe was taken into custody after his own brother turned him in to authorities. The evidence against him for the Mueller family case was substantial. Daniel Lewis Lee was arrested separately and charged as well. Both faced federal charges that carried the possibility of the ultimate punishment. The trials revealed the full scope of their white supremacist beliefs and their plan to use stolen money to establish their ethno-state. In May 1999, both were convicted. The jury sentenced Kehoe to life in prison. Daniel Lewis Lee received the maximum penalty, execution. The different sentences confused many observers since both men participated in the same actions. Then came the twist that made this case even more heartbreaking for the family. Nancy's mother, Erlene Branch Peterson, age 81, became a vocal advocate against Lee's execution. She publicly pleaded for clemency, stating, "I can't see how executing Daniel Lee will honor my daughter in any way. In fact, it's kind of like it dirties her name." The family believed Kehoe was actually more culpable than Lee based on the evidence presented at trial. Even the trial judge opposed Lee's execution. Legal experts questioned the proportionality. Why did Kehoe get life while Lee got the ultimate penalty for the same actions? The family's pleas for mercy were passionate and sincere. They didn't want Lee set free, but they didn't want him executed in their daughter's name either. Their pleas were ignored by federal authorities. Lee's execution was scheduled for July 14, 2020, becoming the first federal execution in 17 years. The resumption of federal executions after such a long pause made this case highly controversial beyond just the facts of what happened to the Mullers. Lee was strapped to the gurney for over 4 hours while last-minute appeals were filed and rejected. His last words were, "I didn't do it. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I'm not a guilty person. You're ending an innocent man." He maintained his innocence to his final breath despite the conviction. The execution proceeded. Daniel Lewis Lee was pronounced gone at 1:30 a.m. The Muller family members who opposed his execution were devastated. They'd begged for a different outcome and been overruled. Chevy Kehoe remains at USP Terre Haute serving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He's now in his 50s, having spent most of his adult life behind bars. He'll never be released. The next case proved that danger can come from the most unexpected places. Beverly Carter. Beverly Carter, 50 years old, was a top-selling agent for Cry Lake Realtors and the 5th best agent in Arkansas. She'd built her career on trust, on meeting strangers at properties, on being available when clients needed her. On September 25, 2014, she went to show a vacant property to people calling themselves Stephen and Crystal Adams. She never returned home that evening. Beverly arrived at the property showing at 6 p.m., exactly on time as she always was. Her husband Carl became concerned when she didn't answer her phone that evening. By the next morning, when she still hadn't come home, he knew something was catastrophically wrong. Beverly never missed appointments or failed to check in with family. What Carl didn't know was that Stephen Adams was actually Aaron Lewis, and he'd already put his plan into motion. When Beverly arrived at the vacant property, Lewis tasered her, telling her, "You're about to have a bad day." Forced into a vehicle and taken to a home Lewis shared with Crystal Lowry, his actual partner, Beverly was held at their residence while Lewis attempted to orchestrate a ransom scheme. He contacted people Beverly knew, demanding money for her safe return. But there was a fatal problem with his plan. Beverly had seen his face. She knew what he looked like. She could identify him. Lewis realized his scheme had a massive flaw from the beginning. On September 26th, the decision was made to eliminate the witness. Beverly was taken from the residence and suffocated with duct tape that was wrapped around her face and head multiple times, creating what investigators would later describe as a green mask, covering her entire face. Her hands were bound. She was buried in a shallow grave at Argus Concrete Plant in Cabot, Arkansas. On September 30th, Beverly's body was found in that shallow grave. The green duct tape was still wrapped 6 times around her face. The discovery confirmed Carl's worst fears. His wife of decades, the mother of his children, had been taken and ended by a complete stranger over a ransom scheme. Aaron Lewis was charged with capital offense. Crystal Lowry was arrested on October 30th, 2014. The evidence against both was overwhelming. Phone records, DNA evidence, witness statements, and physical evidence from multiple locations. In July 2015, Lowry pleaded guilty and received a 30-year sentence in exchange for her testimony against Lewis. She admitted her role in the planning and execution of the kidnapping. She described how they selected Beverly specifically. On January 15, 2016, Lewis was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. The jury heard all the evidence, including the ransom demands and Beverly's final hours. Lewis showed no remorse during the trial. Then came the twist that made this case even more chilling. During testimony, Lowry revealed why they targeted Beverly specifically. She testified they chose victims because they made a lot of money and worked alone. Real estate agents were ideal targets. They met strangers at vacant properties, often with no one else around. And the public perception was they were wealthy from commissions. Beverly was a complete stranger to both Lewis and Lowry. She wasn't selected because of anything personal. She was a target of opportunity, a professional woman doing her job who happened to respond to their fake inquiry about viewing a property. It could have been any agent who answered that call. Beverly just happened to be the one who was available that evening. The random nature of her selection horrified the real estate community across Arkansas and nationwide. If it could happen to Beverly Carter, experienced, successful, careful, it could happen to anyone in the profession. But there was one more bizarre development. In May 2024, Lewis filed court, documents claiming to now identify as a woman named Anastasia Nicole Kimberly, and wants official records changed to reflect this identity. The filing was seen by many as another manipulation attempt. Aaron Lewis remains incarcerated, serving life without parole, housed in maximum security. Crystal Lowry's clemency request was denied in July 2020. She remains behind bars with her earliest parole eligibility coming in 2035, when she'll have served approximately half her sentence. Beverly's passing led to significant changes in real estate safety protocols. Her family established the Beverly Carter Foundation in 2017, which has led Arkansas to require mandatory safety training for all licensed real estate agents. The training covers recognizing dangerous situations, verifying client identities, having safety check-ins, and never showing properties alone to unverified clients. Beverly's legacy is that her name is now attached to real estate safety training across multiple states. Every new agent in Arkansas learns about Beverly Carter and the importance of safety protocols. Her family ensured that her passing would prevent future tragedies by changing how the industry approaches these risks. But the question that haunts Carl and their children is simple. Why Beverly? Why that night? Why did their wife and mother have to be the one who answered that particular fake inquiry from people calling themselves Stephen and Crystal Adams? While Beverly's case brought changes to an entire industry, the next disappearance changed Arkansas's entire emergency alert system. Disappearance of Morgan Nick. Morgan Nick was a bubbly blonde girl from Ozark, Arkansas, who loved apples and bubblegum and wanted to be a circus performer when she grew up. On June 9, 1995, she was taken from a Little League baseball game in Alma while catching fireflies with friends in the parking lot. She was wearing a green Girl Scouts shirt. She vanished in seconds. Her mother, Colleen, had taken Morgan to watch her friend play baseball that evening at Wofford Baseball Field. It was a normal summer evening activity. Kids running around, parents watching the game, the smell of popcorn and hot dogs from the concession stand. Around 10:45 p.m., as the game was winding down, Morgan asked if she could go catch fireflies with other children in the parking lot near the field. Colleen could see the parking lot from where she sat. She said yes. Minutes later, the other children came running back. Morgan wasn't with them. Colleen asked where Morgan was. Children said a man had been talking to her. Then she was just gone. Witnesses reported seeing a creepy man talking to Morgan near the parking lot. Multiple people noticed a red pickup truck with a white camper shell parked nearby throughout the evening. The truck vanished around the same time Morgan disappeared. Police immediately suspected whoever drove that truck had taken her. The investigation became one of the largest missing person searches in Arkansas history. The FBI joined immediately. Volunteers combed through woods, fields, and waterways. Tips poured in from across the country, but there was no sign of Morgan anywhere, despite thousands of hours of searching. On August 31st, 1995, just weeks after Morgan vanished, a man named Billy Jack Lynx attempted to take a child at a Sonic restaurant just 8 miles from where Morgan disappeared. The child escaped and reported it. Lynx was arrested for that incident. Here's what's chilling. Lynx had been questioned about Morgan's disappearance on August 31st, 1995, the very same day as his attempted kidnapping. He convinced investigators he had nothing to do with Morgan's case. They let him go. Hours later, he tried to take another child. Lynx owned a red pickup truck. He lived in the area. He had the means and opportunity. But investigators at the time believed his denials and moved on to other suspects. In 2000, Lynx passed away in prison while serving time for solicitation charges related to other incidents. His passing meant he could never be prosecuted for anything related to Morgan, even if evidence emerged. For decades, Morgan's disappearance remained an agonizing mystery. Colleen Nick never stopped searching. She founded the Morgan Nick Foundation to help other families with missing children. She successfully lobbied to name Arkansas's Amber Alert system the Morgan Nick Alert in her daughter's honor. She turned her grief into action that helped countless other families. Then came the breakthrough 30 years later. In November 2021, the FBI named Billy Jack Lynx as a person of interest in Morgan's disappearance based on new information. But he'd been deceased for over 20 years. How could they prove anything now? Investigators tracked down Lynx's red pickup truck, which had been sold multiple times since 1995. The truck still existed. In September 2024, FBI forensic teams collected evidence from that truck. Hair samples were found and sent to Othram Laboratories for advanced DNA analysis. The results came back definitive. Othram Labs confirmed a first-degree familial DNA match between hair found in Lynx's truck and Morgan's mother, Colleen, proving beyond doubt that Morgan had been in that truck. On October 1st, 2024, Lynx was officially named as the sole suspect in Morgan's disappearance. The twist: the man who took Morgan had been questioned weeks after her disappearance and convinced police he wasn't involved. Then he tried to take another child that same day. He served time for other offenses and passed away in prison in 2000, taking the location of Morgan's remains with him to his grave. Morgan Nick remains missing. She would be 36 years old now. Police continue investigating Lynx's background, interviewing his family and acquaintances from that time period, trying to determine where he might have taken Morgan after putting her in his truck. On June 9th, 2025, the 30th anniversary of her disappearance, the Arkansas State Capitol was illuminated pink in her honor. Colleen Nick now has the answer to who took her daughter. But she still doesn't have Morgan. she still doesn't know where her daughter is. The foundation she built has helped hundreds of families find their missing children. But her own daughter remains unfound 3 decades later. Question that haunts Colleen. If investigators had searched Link's truck in 1995 when he was first questioned, would they have found evidence then? Would Morgan have been found? Why did it take 30 years for someone to test that truck when it was identified as suspicious from day one? Sometimes victims face terrible circumstances more than once, from multiple sources. Jersey Bridgman. Jersey Bridgman had already survived horrific circumstances. Her father and stepmother were imprisoned for chaining her to furniture as punishment. After that situation was discovered, she was placed with her mother in Bentonville, Arkansas, starting what everyone hoped would be a better, safer life. Neighbors Zachary and Amanda Holly frequently watched her, seeming like caring people who wanted to help. 6 days after her birthday in November 2012, on November 20th, she was taken from her bed, assaulted, and strangled. The person responsible was someone her family trusted completely. The night of November 19th, the Hollys had watched Jersey as they'd done many times before. They helped put her to bed in her own room. Everything seemed normal and routine. The next morning at 6:43 a.m., Jersey's mother discovered her daughter missing from her bedroom. The door had been left unlocked. Jersey was simply gone from her bed. Body was found in a vacant house just 2 doors away from the Holly residence, discovered minutes after she was reported missing. She had been taken from her bed, carried to that vacant house, assaulted, and strangled with her own clothing. The house was adjacent to where Zachary and Amanda Holly lived. The investigation moved quickly. DNA evidence from the scene was analyzed and linked directly to Zachary Holly. When confronted with the evidence, Holly confessed to what he'd done. He admitted he'd taken Jersey from her bed, carried her to the vacant house, and ended her life there. On November 26, 2012, Holly was arrested and charged with capital offense. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, his confession, his proximity to both Jersey's home and the location where she was found. The trial took place in May 2015. The jury heard the horrific details of what happened to this girl who'd already suffered so much in her short life. They convicted Holly. After just 2 hours of deliberation on May 20th, 2015. The jury recommended the ultimate punishment, and the judge agreed. Zachary Holly was sentenced accordingly. The twist that makes this case even more devastating: Jersey had already been victimized by her father and stepmother, who were imprisoned for chaining her up. Then she was placed in what was supposed to be a safe environment with her mother. The person who actually ended her life was another trusted adult. A neighbor who watched her regularly, who her family relied on for help, who had access to their home and their daughter. While her parents were in prison for harming her, the man who actually ended her life was walking free in the neighborhood, trusted to care for her. But there's another layer to this tragedy. Holly himself may have been a victim of circumstances beyond his control. He'd been investigated by DHS previously and was raised by a stepfather who was a registered offender. This doesn't excuse his actions. Nothing can excuse what he did to Jersey, but it raises questions about cycles that perpetuate through generations. Zachary Holly remains on the state's execution list at Varner Unit. His appeals continue through the court system. As of March 2025, his case is pending before the Arkansas Supreme Court. No execution date has been scheduled yet, and the appeals process could continue for years or even decades. Jersey Bridgman deserved better. She deserved to be safe. She deserved to grow up and have the childhood that was stolen from her twice, first by her father and stepmother, then by Zachary Holly. Instead, Her name is attached to one of Arkansas's most heartbreaking cases of betrayed trust and failed protective systems. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.